townships into that input. So something else we need to keep in mind, that there's nothing to hide in terms of what we're trying to do. We're very open about it, very open about the behaviors that we're engaging in and the behaviors that we expect of the people that we're engaging with.
Back here.
Good afternoon, Chief Bratton. My question is, did the New York State law requiring the provision of emergency shelter beds aid your efforts in getting people out of the subways or off the streets? And would you recommend similar legislation in California or Los Angeles?
There were several things that assisted us in the subway experience. The subway experience is different somewhat from the street experience. But one of them was, in fact, the law requiring that basically there'd be an effort made to accommodate the population. And so the one thing that New York had going for it, even in the early 90s, was a shelter system that was not concentrated in just one area of the city. Every borough of the city had shelters, huge, fortress-like institutions, not too dissimilar to the mental institutions that we tried to get rid of in the 70s and 80s. What we eliminated in the 70s, we effectively created for a time in New York, we created as the shelters for the homeless, because they had much of the same feel as the institutions that, which many of them had actually come out of, ironically. We did not have a homeless problem. Indeed, that term homeless didn't really occur until, as George has written eloquently about, we had deinstitutionalization in the 70s, compounded by decriminalization, a lot of the laws that we used to control some of that behavior, drug laws, etc. And then thirdly, depolicing. So few police on the streets. New York City went down to 21,000 police officers in the 1970s, at the height of the city disassembling. So their laws and the obligation to fund, in fact, did help. And then we also had the benefit of the subway system, the ability to basically move people out of the system. But what we did, we moved them onto buses to transport them to the shelters. It was not just a matter of ejection, displacement. It was, with compassion, the idea, particularly on winter nights, you're not going to freeze to death in one of those tunnels in the subway. We're going to get you on a bus and get you to a shelter. And we had laws that allowed us to effectively, temporarily, take custody of an individual who was at risk themselves because of their condition. And so we had some assistance there. So New York was aided by laws that required high degrees of spending, and but it took them many years to get it right. There's those shelters that eventually became SROs, and then eventually became like Project 50, different types of housing for different types of needs. Well, that's somewhat what went on in the 90s, but you can still read stories today about New York City in terms of shelter for families, homeless families. It's still not an issue-free issue, but it's tipped from what it was in a positive way.
Over here.
My name is Don Gardner. I'm not going to do a long dissertation. I actually have a question. You know, living down there and understanding the NIMBY issue that everybody has with especially the Safer Cities Initiative, and everybody's afraid that everybody's going to be displaced. I mean, is it an unwarranted fear on behalf, I know maybe you can't speak on this probably because it has to do with the ACLU and the lawsuits and other people. Is there some sort of unwarranted fear, NIMBY fear, that somehow Skid Row, the Missions, and everybody is going to be completely rolled over and gentrified out of downtown, when myself, I don't even perceive, you know, that happening anywhere in my lifetime?
I think there's a lot of different perspectives about what the ultimate outcome might be down there as the economic forces create change in that neighborhood, as it creates change all over the city. You've got a similar debate going on now over Universal City. You have some similar debates going on now with the Staples Center, as the nature of an area is changing. That's part of life. Nothing ever stays the same forever. But in the case of Skid Row, because there's so much attention focused on the negative aspects of all that goes on down there, there's a combined set of issues. A fear of others who are living in neighborhoods that don't have that problem that is going to come to them. And two, a fear on the part, I think, of some of those who choose to live in that area, that in fact they're going to be pushed out as the economic conditions change. That's what I'm saying. It's just that the answers to some of these issues are beyond my scope of responsibility, but it's not beyond my scope of awareness, because being aware of that is how I serve all the different clients, understanding each client might have a very different perspective about what it is we should do or should not do, or how we should prioritize it. And the old expression of policeman's lot is not a happy one. It is certainly a very confusing one, in the sense of trying to deal with all these different constituencies or clients, if you will.
Although we may have a lot of different agreements of perspectives here, I think we're all here because we understand that this isn't about numbers, but it's about people's lives. What do you see as you talked about different levels of medicine. What do you see as the next levels for the next 2 or 3 years of maybe coming up with some interim solutions where the permanent supportive housing has not been built? There's not a consensus for the other neighborhoods to partner. There's not the commitment from the federal government and the county. But what can we do ourselves as a community downtown to create a safe place for the homeless people, but also an environment for people like Don that live here, for the people who have businesses, for the people who really want to be progressive and care, but are stuck in this place where long-term is sort of a dream, and most of our partners who we see in the community who are saying they're taking care of the homelessness, and not the missions, but the other people,